Let's go across now to Dr. C Rangarajan, former Reserve Bank of India Governor, for his thoughts on the budgets and some of the structural changes that have been made as well. Dr. Rangarajan, thanks for your time here on Bloomberg Quint. Let me first ask you what you read into the thrust of the budget. They've maintained a 3.3% fiscal deficit, so in some ways they haven't given in to that temptation of pump priming the economy at a time when it's weak.
I'm not able to hear you. Can you make it louder, please?
Okay. Dr. Rangarajan, I'm going to try again. I wanted to get your first impressions on the budget and the fact that at least on the headline number, fiscal consolidation has been maintained.
The budget has to be framed against a background of declining growth rate and distress in agriculture and problems in many other areas. And therefore, one expected the budget to address these problems. In a sense, it has addressed these problems and come up with various proposals and so on. But one of the critical issues facing was the decline in investment, and which was leading to a fall in the growth rate. But it is not very clear from the budget speech and the documents whether the proposals that are being put out will have a clear impact on accelerating investment. But one thing that stands out very prominently in the budget is the commitment of the government and the finance minister to fiscal consolidation. Actually, is set at 3.3% of the GDP for 1920, which is a slight improvement over the what was indicated in the interim budget. But the actual implementation of this will depend upon how the revenues will grow, both tax revenues and non-tax revenues, and how the expenditures will move. The analysis of the numbers indicates while the tax revenue is expected to grow modestly, the non-tax revenue is expected to grow very sharply. Therefore, what is really required for the government as it moves along during the year, watch the expenditures and the revenue. And if the revenues are not growing at the rate desired, probably they should make adjustment on the expenditures. So the broad thing really is, yes, the commitment to budget deficit fiscal deficit is good. Perhaps some of the proposals, the expenditure programs are also in the right direction. But whether they will all lead to an acceleration of investment immediately is a matter of doubt.
Dr. Rangarajan, a few questions. One, since you mentioned non-tax revenues, the government continues to budget for almost 90,000 crore in dividend from the Reserve Bank of India, even though they have given an interim dividend already earlier in this year. So do you think this tug of war over the RBI's capital is not over yet? How do you view that, sir? Dr. Rangarajan, if you can hear me, I wanted to get your views on the government still budgeting about 90,000 crore in dividends from the Reserve Bank of India, sir.
Yeah. Well, I think that is in the direction in which it has been moving. Perhaps that's a fairly large number, but the committee is still sitting on it. The committee's recommendations are known. Further discussions will. So that is why I said that non-tax revenues, which include interest and dividends, are pitched at a higher level, and therefore the progress of expenditures will have to be adjusted as the revenue projections become clear.
Dr. Rangarajan, the other big structural change that has been announced is that the government will now, as a sovereign, borrow overseas. What are your thoughts, sir? Are we ready to go in that direction?
I have my own doubts. I mean, this we have discussed since in the early 90s, immediately after liberalization. We have always thought that it is much better that sovereign borrowing in foreign currency should be avoided because the only institutions that have gone out to borrow are public sector enterprises. That we had agreed to and that we allowed. But allowing the government to go and borrow in foreign currency, in my view, is perhaps something that can be avoided. Certainly, we are now allowing the foreign institutions to buy Indian government bonds in rupees. Therefore, the exchange risk is borne by the outsider. But if you borrow in foreign currency, then the exchange risk is also borne by us. May not be the most desirable thing to do.
Dr. Rangarajan, in some ways it's a realization of the falling household savings and that perhaps that pool is no longer enough to fund the investment needs of this country. If we are going in that direction, who sets the prudential limit? Would this be the RBI limit for foreign investment in government bonds in terms of how much of the pool they can hold?
Well, I think it's a matter of decision between the government and the Reserve Bank. I mean, how much they should really borrow, because that again depends upon the ability of the government to repay later on and so on. Therefore, first of all, as I said, that I don't think it's a very wise decision to do. But second of all, if it is being done, then both the Reserve Bank and the government should really sit down together and see how much they want to borrow. Now, I would say that if, for example, the foreign investment that is coming into the country is really adequate, then the government should avoid going outside and foreign borrowing in a foreign currency. I think it all depends upon the extent of foreign funds into the country. At the moment, it seems to be adequate. The minister herself said at one point that the flow of foreign direct investment and the flow of portfolio investment seem to be of the right order. If that is so, I do not think there is any compelling reason why the government should go out and borrow.
Okay. Dr. Rangarajan, the government has also put in another 70,000 crore for bank recapitalization. They have said that they will do some governance reforms, but we didn't get any specifics. In addition, they have backstopped NBFCs to some extent by saying that PSU banks will provide credit guarantee. On both those counts, sir, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the recapitalization to the extent of 70,000 crore is probably appropriate. I mean, I think that's what they should do, because if the banking system is to move in the direction of lending more, then they should be equipped with it, because the lending capacity of the banks is largely determined by the amount of capital that they have, and therefore putting in this money is important. And I had always felt that instead of doing it in phases, whatever capital that they want to give to the public sector banks must be done at one go. Therefore, that's a good idea. The other is on the NBFCs, the kind of liquidity or support that has to be given is something that must be the concern of the Reserve Bank of India, whether they think that liquidity is needed, and if so, they can think in terms of providing it. But the view that the Reserve Bank had taken recently, apparently, is that the NBFCs do not need a special window and they can be helped in other ways. Therefore, I would personally think that the best institution to be of help to the NBFCs would be the Reserve Bank of India.
Dr. Rangarajan, two last questions. One is on the revenue side. The government has in some ways gone in the direction of a super rich tax. How do you see that? Inevitable, given that the spending requirements, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, are quite large right now, particularly given the PM Kisan scheme which has been introduced?
Well, the surcharge on the highly rich people has been talked about even earlier. And I think we did that also in the earlier. In the UPA government also introduced a surcharge on what may be called the super rich. But perhaps the extent of the surcharge is perhaps very high. I think it adds significantly to the tax burden. Therefore, that may have some adverse impact. Second, also, that I feel that the state governments would also be very unhappy because this surcharge is not shared with them. And when particularly the surcharge is substantial, the state governments may feel somewhat upset by this.
Dr. Rangarajan, last question is on the digital payment space, only because they have once again gone in the direction of trying to disincentivize cash use, this time saying a 2% TDS will be imposed on cash withdrawals above 1 crore. So this pull and push to try and reduce cash in the economy now through various means, do you think that's justified? Should this not be a natural process?
Well, the objective is clear, namely that you want to discourage the cash payments. But whether this is the most appropriate mechanism, I do not know, because it is also about 1 crore rupees. Therefore, it will really hurt people who really withdraw fairly substantial amount of cash. This is worth trying. I mean, I don't know how effective it will be, and whether the people who want to really use cash find other ways of avoiding it and so on and so forth. But not a bad idea. I would say it's not a bad idea.
Dr. Rangarajan, then your final word on the budget. What would you say, describe it as?
It addresses some of the issues, but as I said at the beginning, since accelerating investment is important, and both the survey and the minister also spoke about investment-driven growth. But I am somewhat doubtful or skeptical about the budget proposals having a direct impact on investment.
Dr. Rangarajan, thank you so much indeed for joining us here. Much appreciate your wisdom on some of the issues that came up in the budget.